The Hedonism. Chapter 1. The Pavilion of Silk.
The air inside the private pavilion of Baiai was heavy, sweet, and suffocatingly warm. It smelled of crushed dark cherries, burning jasmine oil, and the sharp, metallic tang of unwatered wines imported from the southern islands. Quintus lay back on a mountain of down-filled silk cushions, his purple tunic unbuttoned at the throat. His fingers, soft and completely unaccustomed to labor, casually reached into a silver bowl held by a young servant, plucking a honey-glazed fig. Around him, the room was a blur of motion dancers moving to the soft, hypnotic rhythm of double flutes, wealthy patricians laughing through stained teeth, and tables groaning under the weight of exotic meats and iced fruits. Quintus was 28 winters old, the sole heir to a vast shipping fortune. He spent his days chasing the next sensation, moving from the hot thermal baths to the gambling tables and from the banquet halls to the silk beds. Yet, if someone looked closely at his face during a rare moment of silence, they would see a terrifying emptiness. The pleasures that had once filled him with a wild excitement now felt entirely flat. He required more wine to feel the same warmth. He needed stranger, more expensive distractions just to keep the clawing monster of boredom at bay. He was a hunter who had become the prey. He was chasing an illusion called pleasure, completely blind to the fact that his constant indulgence was turning his mind into a soft, rotting swamp. "Try the spiced pheasant, Quintus." A wealthy young noble laughed, his face flushed red with wine. "We must enjoy the hour. Life is short, and a man who does not taste every pleasure is no better than a stone." Quintus forced a heavy, artificial smile, but as he swallowed the rich food, it tasted like dry ash in his mouth. He felt a deep, dull ache in his chest, a heavy lethargy that no silver cup or silk cushion could melt. He was a prisoner who was decorating his own cell with roses, terrified of the silence that waited outside the curtain. From the dark, unlit terrace near the stone archway stood Demetrius. He was an old scholar who had spent his youth serving as a military engineer in the legions before retiring to a life of stark, uncompromising study. He wore nothing but a coarse, faded grey wool tunic, and his hands were rough, calloused by decades of honest work. He stood perfectly straight, his posture relaxed, his eyes cold and clinical as he watched the chaotic overindulgence of the pavilion. "You are drinking from a broken cup, Quintus," Demetrius said, his voice deep, slow, and unshakable, cutting through the background hum of the flutes like an iron bar. "You believe you are the master of this palace, but I see a helpless slave who must ask a grape and a cup of wine for permission to have a good day."
Chapter 2. The Master of the Leash.
Quintus sat up on his cushions, his silver goblet rattling against the marble floor. "A slave. You speak with the bitterness of an old soldier who can no longer taste the wine, Demetrius. This is freedom. I have the wealth to satisfy every desire. To deny yourself the pleasures of the flesh is the act of a madman who hates his own existence. Freedom does not live in the stomach, boy," Demetrius replied, turning his back on the flickering lamps and walking out onto the cool, dark stone terrace where the night sea wind blew. Grudgingly, driven by a strange, restless irritation, Quintus took his silver cup and followed him out into the dark. The cool night air struck Quintus's face, washing away some of the suffocating heat of the pavilion. The sound of the flutes became faint, replaced by the deep, heavy rhythm of the sea crashing against the rocks below. "Tell me, Quintus," Demetrius said, pointing down at a massive hound chained to an iron post near the villa gates. The dog was aggressively barking at its own shadow, pulling at its leather collar until its throat bled, desperate to reach a scrap of meat thrown just out of its grasp. Who is the master in that yard? Is it the hound who thinks he is running wild after the food, or is it the man who holds the leash? The man holds the leash, obviously. Quintus muttered, his head swimming from the wine. "Exactly." Demetrius nodded, his eyes locking onto Quintus's defensive gaze with a clinical clarity. "And your desires are that exact leash. Every time you feel a craving for luxury, for wine, for an instant hit of comfort, and you immediately bow your head to satisfy it, you are letting your animal nature pull your collar. The hunter doesn't need iron bars to trap you. He just needs to show you a sweet pastry or a soft bed, and you will march into the cage yourself. To look for pleasure in every action is the characteristic of a beast, not a man. You believe your wealth makes you powerful, but any merchant with a rare spice can lead you by the nose wherever he wants.
Chapter 3: The Anatomy of the Flavor.
Demetrius picked up a small piece of charcoal from the terrace brazier and dropped it into Quintus's silver cup of unwhitened wine. The dark liquid instantly hissed, turning black and murky under the soot. The hedonist lives in a permanent state of internal decay. Demetrius explained, his voice dropping into that deep, meditative cadence of the inner citadel. He believes that his mind is a vessel that must be constantly filled with external pleasures to be happy. But the human body has a terrible mathematical law, adaptation. The more you feed the animal, the hungrier it becomes. The soft bed makes the floor feel like rock. The fine wine makes the spring water taste like mud. You amplify your dependencies until you are completely fragile. A simple delay in your banquet, a slight chill in the room, or a sour grape is enough to ruin your entire day and make you throw a tantrum like a child. He took the ruined silver cup and threw it over the terrace railing, watching it vanish into the dark sea below. "Look at the forge of your own character," Quintus, the old soldier, whispered. "The wise man treats pleasure like a dangerous beast. He does not let it enter his house. He builds his happiness entirely within the boundaries of his own reason, his own discipline, and his own virtue. When fortune brings him a fine meal or a comfortable room, he enjoys it with detachment, but he never needs it. He can sleep on a stone floor, eat a piece of dry barley bread, and drink from a muddy stream, and his mind remains as unshakable and joyful as a king on a throne. He has broken the leash. Every time the urge for pleasure strikes your chest, apply the clinical knife of reason to your cravings. Look at the object of your desire, the sweet wine, the soft silk, the easy comfort, and say to your soul, "You are an external shadow. You have no power to make my mind wise, my character brave, or my actions just. If you do not practice the voluntary discomfort, your comfort will eventually become your executioner."
Chapter 4: The Trial of the March.
4 weeks later, the illusion of Quintus's comfortable paradise was shattered by an imperial decree. A massive political rebellion had broken out on the northern frontier, and the emperor ordered a mandatory mobilization of all noble sons of military age to join the reserve legions. Quintus, despite his wealth and his desperate attempts to buy a medical exemption, was stripped of his silk robes, buckled into a heavy, unpolished iron breastplate, and marched out into the cold, rainy mountains of the north alongside 3,000 regular legionaries. The transition was a violent, agonizing shock to his soft frame. There were no servants to hold his shield, no down cushions to protect his back from the wet earth, and no spiced pheasant to satisfy his stomach. The legion marched for 12 hours a day through freezing mud and driving sleet. For the first 5 days, Quintus was on the verge of total collapse. His feet were covered in bleeding blisters, his muscles burned with an intense fury, and his mind was a battlefield of hysterical resentment. He wanted to weep, to curse the emperor, to lie down in the mud and die, simply because his body could not tolerate the absolute absence of his comfort. He was the hound whose leash had been violently pulled in the dark. On the 7th night, sitting in a freezing leather tent that smelled of wet canvas and horse sweat, Quintus looked at his dirty, raw hands. He was shivering, his dinner nothing but a hard piece of salted pork and a wooden cup of stale rainwater. The old animal panic tried to storm his mind. A dark voice whispered, "You cannot survive this. You are too soft. You need the heat of Baiae, or your spirit will break." But then he remembered the dark terrace. He remembered Demetrius throwing the silver cup into the sea. He remembered the old soldier's words. Quintus closed his eyes. He took a deep, steady breath of the freezing mountain air, forcing his mind to step back from the edge of his physical misery. He dropped the narrative of his suffering and focused entirely on the factual reality of the hour. The rain is just water. The mud is just earth. My mind is still functional. My character is the only thing that can freeze tonight.
Chapter 5. The Forged Will.
By the 3rd week of the northern campaign, a profound, historic shift had occurred inside the iron armor of the young heir. The frantic, weeping complaints had completely vanished. Quintus's posture had changed. His shoulders were square, his jaw was set like granite, and his eyes carried a deep, unhurried stillness that had nothing to do with the painted masks of his past life. He no longer looked at the salted pork with disgust. He chewed it slowly, finding that hunger was the finest spice the world had ever invented. He slept on the hard earth of the camp floor, as if it were a bed of feathers, his mind so entirely detached from his surroundings that the cold wind could no longer find a grip on his soul. He had discovered the inner furnace. The voluntary discomfort of the march hadn't broken him. It had melted away the soft grease of his indulgence, leaving behind a razor-sharp, unbreakable core of iron discipline. When the campaign finally ended with a treaty in the spring, the legion marched back into the warm provinces. Quintus returned to his grand estate in Baiae, his skin darkened by the sun, his muscles lean and hard from the march. The servants had prepared a massive, decadent welcome banquet in his honor. The tables were packed with silver chalices, exotic sea fish, and mountains of silk cushions. The local nobles gathered around, waiting to hear his complaints about the brutal northern wildlands. Quintus stood at the entrance of the pavilion, wearing nothing but his plain, unpolished campaign tunic. He looked at the silver cups, he looked at the soft silks, and he felt absolutely nothing. No desire, no rush of excitement, no craving. He smiled, a genuine, powerful expression of absolute inner freedom. "Take the cushions away," Quintus said, his voice deep, slow, and perfectly unshakable, silencing the room instantly. "And drain the wine barrels into the garden. Bring me a wooden cup of fresh spring water and a piece of plain barley bread." The wealthy nobles stared at him in absolute, paralyzed confusion. "Quintus, are you mad? You have just returned from hell. You deserve the comfort. Why would you live like a beggar in your own palace?" Quintus placed a steady, scarred hand over his own breastplate, his eyes looking through them with an unshakable weight. "I spent 20 years living as a beggar, searching for my happiness inside a silver cup. The North didn't take my life, it gave me my soul. I have found a pleasure that no fortune can give, and no winter can freeze the mastery of my own mind. Keep your silk, my friends. I am finally free. Wipe out the impression, stay the impulse, quench the desire, keep the ruling center in its own power." Quintus turned away from the crowded banquet, stepping out onto the quiet stone terrace to enjoy the clean evening breeze with empty hands and an unbreakable, unshakable soul. Most of us spend our entire lives trapped in the prison of hedonism and pleasure addiction. We are constantly chasing the next hit of comfort, the next digital distraction, the next consumer purchase, or the next instant gratification, completely blind to the fact that every time we satisfy a shallow craving, we are tightening the leash around our own necks. We have turned ourselves into fragile psychological dependents, allowing the state of our bodies or the quality of our food to dictate whether we have an unshakable day or a miserable one. But a Stoic knows that a soft life creates a rotting character. The next time you find yourself craving an instant escape into comfort, luxury, or distraction, stop. Do not let the animal pull the leash. Remember the silver cup of Baiae. Take a deep breath, embrace the discomfort of the hour, and say to your soul, "This craving has no sovereignty over my mind." Clear the excess, practice the voluntary simplicity, and spend your limited energy only on the strength of your own inner citadel. Do not be the hound after the meat. Remain the master of your own soul. This is Neo-Aurelium, transmission on the ultimate victory over hedonism. Stay unshakable. Take care of yourself